So I will be beginning with the man who has done backstage of democracy, Mr. Amogh Sharma. Please.
Thank you so much, sir. Firstly, I'll start by thanking Professor Afroz for this very kind invitation. To Dr. Faizan, Amir, Noor, who have really done, and the entire team at Mado, who have done a wonderful job in hosting us. So, there's this famous saying that those who can do, those who can't teach. So that's my excuse. I can't do political consulting, so for my sins, I get to talk about it, teach it, and research it, and that has been the culmination of this book, which I published recently. So whatever I'm going to say is based on interactions of the research that has taken place over the course of the last decade. So, starting with this question about political consulting, yesterday we discussed a lot about what is driving this industry. You had Mr. Amitabh Tiwari sir tell us technology, the role technology is playing. He of course gave us the aggregate numbers of the WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook user base. When you look at it in proportionate terms, the point where we started out with in 2014 general elections was even more meager, right? So in 2014 national election study, we learned that only 10% of India's voting age population had a Facebook account, only 3% had a Twitter account, right? So we're not even talking about how many were active users on these platforms. Simply in proportionate terms, people who claim to even have an account was abysmally low. This of course has increased by the time we reach 2019 or 2024. The other big reason that we heard was weakness in political parties, that of course as parties can't perform certain functions, of course they've had to outsource these tasks to these consultants. In my own research, and this is perhaps one of the central arguments of the book, one of the things I argue is that what's also driving this industry is a generation of people which has grown up in post-liberalization India, which, for the lack of a better word, I can call the new middle class, which has arisen in post-liberalization India, which is very interested in politics, but doesn't know how to get involved in politics, right? There is this belief in the political culture of this new middle class, young Indians, that existing channels of party politics are broken. They're too beholden to money, caste power, muscle power, criminality, and we don't even accept these beliefs. I'm simply saying that in their own belief system, there is a belief that there is no space for people from their profile to enter into politics, notwithstanding the fact that people who hold these views have considerable privilege of their own, and we can open that question up, right? So in my research, I find that what's also driving this industry is a generation of young citizens, the new middle class, which is really experimenting for a new way of doing politics, of getting a foothold in politics, and then leveraging their skills of data, their languages of data and technology to help people in the back room. Hence the title of the book is The Backstage of Democracy. People who would rather work in the back room of politics rather than active front stage. But of course, if we've learned something from Prashant Kishore is that what people who start out in the backstage might even enter the front stage of politics, right? The entire experiment with Jan Suraj proves that in some ways, people who are using this to get a foothold in politics, to get their foot in the door, might one day become ticket aspirants. And this is something that here and there I've also seen play out in last year's general election. So, speaking to the theme of the panel, that should we fear them? Are they an inevitable need and necessity in the current landscape? I'll say this, that when we think of political consulting firms, it's very important to not see them as this hegemonic structure. And in my own research, I found it to look at it as a three-tier structure. On the top are the big guys, right? And it's a gendered space, so most of them tend to be guys. And those are the people in some ways who have come here for the conference, right? The practitioners, the top folks who provide the big strategic decisions. They are the ones who bring in clients for their firms. But the core of the work is done by the middle rung, right? Which you can just call as employees of political consulting firms. They don't last more than 1 or 2 election cycles. They usually survive and then they take their fortunes elsewhere. And I think to really understand about how consultants are really engaging and impacting India's democracy, we need to look at this class within political consulting firms. People who are actually stationed in the constituencies, who work on a day-to-day basis with the party workers, with the karyakartas, with the local MLA or MP who's fighting the election. And that has been certainly the approach that I take in my own research. And one of the questions, and I won't take up too much time, one of the questions that I really end the book on is to ask that, okay, they come with this predisposition where they think Indian politics is corrupt, criminal, too beholden to caste and muscle power. Once they experience Indian politics at such close quarters, what happens to their belief system? Do they challenge it? Are they forced to revise their belief system, or is it something else? And on the whole, I would say it's a mixed picture, right? On the negative side, you will find enough people who will use their experience in political consulting firms that it confirms their worst cynicism about Indian politics, right? I've had folks tell me that, I was assigned to an MLA leader who's a history cheater, right? He's someone who has 5 criminal cases pending against him. How in God's name can I go and work for this person in good faith? So, that sort of cynicism gets reinforced. Both are काफी हद तक. Equally, I have to say, and I can't emphasize this point enough, and this is something I would really urge people who work in the sector to take seriously, is that this is an extremely gendered space. Women find it extremely hard to be stationed in the consultancies and do the kind of work that is often demanded of them, right? And we can understand that political consultants single-handedly can't change the patriarchal structure of our society, ये नहीं हो सकता, but फिर भी, I would really want us to take seriously about how this can be made a more gender equitable space. It's changing, but it needs to change much faster than that, right? So those are the things that I think need to be taken seriously. Equally, what I find quite encouraging, if I could use the word, is the fact that a lot of people, they might come with certain biases, certain prejudiced ways of looking at Indian politics, but they leave with a much more nuanced appreciation of what the life of an Indian politician is, right? So they'll think कि हमें लगता था कि जब आए थे कि सब नेता चोर हैं, that famous slogan, when which is popular from the post-2011 era. But they will say that once you actually see things happen on the ground, you see how a politician can really do everything and be everything at the grassroots level for these people. You realize that we need to move away from this monolithic way in which we talk about politics in the cities. And there is a much greater nuanced appreciation of what a politician actually does. And to look through these headline summary ki kiske kitne FIR hain, kiske against kitne scams chal rahe hain. So some of them do come back with not a rosy-eyed picture about what Indian politics can be, what it should be, but they have a more nuanced appreciation of what the life of an average Indian politician is. And they are able to break away from the conditioning that you get when you live in urban cities such as I did. So I don't say that I stand outside that class. The final thing I'll say is this: that what is this outsourcing of tasks doing to political parties in general? Now, of course, I think, again, if I were to summarize it in a single word, I would say it's a mixed bag, right? So in some ways, parties lose internal capacity to perform certain functions, but what I find quite interesting is that at the grassroots, there's actually a deep sense of appreciation that often Karyakartas will tell you they have towards certain political consulting firms. Not across the board, but you will find enough party workers who will say that these consultants came in, they help us set up our social media presence, they help activate that. Which before then, we weren't getting that sort of assistance from the social media cell which sits in New Delhi. These people were really helping us set up some sort of infrastructure. Whether that lasts beyond the life of a campaign, wo unke upar hai, how much they can take that forward. But they sort of get the ball rolling, that is something worth saying. The second thing worth saying is that often, you hear these stories in mainstream media about stories of friction. The 2017 campaign, which I followed very closely in Punjab and UP, there were immense stories about how PK has left Captain Amrinder Singh's house, he's not speaking to Priyanka Gandhi. All of these stories kept circulating. I find it quite funny that when I would go and speak to politicians, local politicians, they would actually tell me that this is simply a story we had leaked in the mainstream media. Because if we let these people get all the limelight, we will become defund, right? So the only thing I will say is that when we read in newspapers, all of us, including myself, about friction between political consulting firms and party workers and mainstream media, take it with a pinch of salt. Often these are leaks in which politicians are doing this subtle thing of sending out feelers, sending out stories to say that they still have all the aces up their sleeves and they haven't ceded all the control to political consulting firms. So I think I've taken enough time, and I'll stop there. There's of course loads more for me to say.
Thanks a very timely and important statement, and at least he has given us certain eligibility criteria to become and join politics and politician. Is that you should be Bahubali, or you should be a Punjipati, or you should be a Jativadi or Parivarvadi. So generally, not everyone fits into this framework. But how backstage democracy is working, and the way middle class is aspiring to join the politics, but not finding a way out. So some important statements are being made, and I hope some questions will be there.